Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a bunch of emotes in chat, apparently. I am, as ever and as always, your host, the Lore Runner. I'm gonna go back to bed. Good night. What? Sorry. I'm awake. What's going on? I do hope this fine Saturday is finding y'all fine. Finally? Friendly? Fecund? Fiduciary? Fastidious. There we go. I hope this morning is finding everyone fastidious. So I hope y'all have seen the highlight video, or the announcement video by now. If you haven't, it's like 2 minutes long. Go watch it. If those of you have, or don't care, watch it anyways. I'm going to just sit for just a moment. Let it keep a couple people kind of slide in bit by bit. Because I got some history to tell you. This has been a long time in coming. In fact, let's play a very brief game. How many years, or let's put it this way, what year do you think the ReWrite project started? There are technically 3 valid options. I have all 3 of them written down here. The day I was born. Yes, how did you know? Oh gosh. I wasn't actually expecting subs today. Hang on. Hey, Rex. I noticed you haven't auditioned yet for RFF1, Rex. Just saying. I'm going to be doing those auditions today. Like, I'm going to be going through those auditions today, so... FYI. That's true for everyone, by the way. And now to completely ignore Dragon's Hunter Forever. RFF? Sorry. So I've gotten into the habit, especially because of how much I text, how much I type stuff for the rewrite, that in order to distinguish between canon and rewrite, I just put an R in front of anything that's a rewrite. So there's Final Fantasy 1, and then there's R Final Fantasy 1. R Diablo, R Wars, R Trek, you get it. It's just a quick shorthand to indicate. I'm just making sure, Rex, because I noticed you hadn't auditioned. Hang on, so... God, I'm falling behind already. Give me a second. Thank you, Rax, von Falkenstein, Underworld's Best Paths. I've put that all towards the Kingdom Hearts block, this 2D Sonic block, the Andor Show, Season 1, Thea 1 and 2, Graveyard Keeper, Phoenix Point, and Resident Evil block. 2006 is technically the answer to the question. It's also technically 2012 and 2005. Those are the 3 valid answers. Once upon a time, there was a man, and that man was in a wheelchair at the time, and he spent a lot of his time doing 3 things. It's true, linear. I never even thought about that. Our FF1. One of those things was watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy over and over. Yes, really, I think I've told that story. I just watch through it and then go back through it because I was in a wheelchair. The second thing was I used to play the crap out of WoW. I used to just sit there and play WoW. Pretty much any time my friends were on, I was playing WoW with them. But then there was actually a third thing. So there was this little tool. Some of you may or may not remember that I used to be a part of the fan translation, fan emulation scene. And I haven't been a part of that scene for it's 20 years at this point, but I did dip my toes in there. I did do some basic programming things, and I used to be a part of that group, which worked on things like Final Fantasy V, the English translation, and Mother. That is to say, Mother 1 or Earthbound 0 or whatever you want to call it. Also some stuff with Seiken Densetsu, but that's neither here nor there. Point is, as a part of that group, I got in a lot of insight into how the games were actually programmed and designed, because that was kind of the thing. But also I gained access to certain tools. One of those tools was a very handy-dandy exporter-inserter, I'm saying that wrong, for Final Fantasy VI. It was something that could take the SMC file and just say, and read all of the values, and you could change any of those values, and it would remember every single one of the destination points, and then it could reinsert the new values back in. This isn't a total editor, and that's the reason I'm phrasing this very specifically. It's not like I could do anything with FF6, but what I could do is I could change the text that shows up on screen. I've actually demonstrated this on camera. I still have this tool. I could make a copy of FF6 right now that just starts talking to people in chat, because, you know, I can edit the text. But it would also enable you to fiddle around with some basic stuff like the damage values or the health values of certain enemies and bosses, and of course the player characters and their leveling arcs, the formulas that determine their stat growth, stuff like that. So that was all cool, and it burgeoned within me an idea, because at that point in my life I hadn't been very creative for a while, and some of you may know that I have a need to be creative, and that's not me being facetious. I mean that with total and absolute sincerity. I consider being creative to be pretty much right up there with needing food. And again, I'm not joking and I'm not exaggerating. If I don't have some kind of creative outlet in my life, it has a very demonstrable, noticeable, tangible, deleterious effect upon my psyche. So, I needed some method to be creative while I was in a wheelchair. And you already see where this is going. So what I was doing was I challenged myself to write a completely new story within the framework of Final Fantasy VI. And it was a very fun, interesting, and creative challenge that actually I kind of want to go back to someday, just for the hell of it. Because you can't change the scenes, right? The animations, the blocking of who's where, the camera angle, all of that is identical. You cannot change any of that. But you can change what they're saying. And so the creative challenge then became, how do I make a brand new story, essentially by just dubbing over an existing one? If this sounds familiar, you've probably seen some films or fan works or otherwise do this exact same type of challenge over the years. Some people do it because, you know, that way they can kind of skip over the extremely difficult and time-consuming process, and in some cases very expensive process, of making, you know, a full film or movie or game. But I was doing it specifically because I wanted that creative challenge of pushing myself to make a limited story, right? That, functionally, was the very beginning of the ReWrite project. Now, I know that's different than what we ended up doing. Probably, Mike Romano. I wouldn't know. I obviously was not doing it for parody reasons. I guess, yeah, that's the abridged series, which I actually haven't watched. Was do that. I did watch FF7 abridged, that's true, but that's different. Point here being, that was the very beginning of the ReWrite project's kernel, because the next thing that happened was something that I hope some of you have heard of. Now, this is definitely a parody, but it's not a show or a game or a movie. It's actually a web comic. How many of you ever heard of DM of the Rings? Which came out in 2006. DM of the Rings was a webcomic where someone would take screen captures of the Lord of the Rings movie and completely replace their dialogue. The thrust of it, the main point of how he decided to do that, how they decided to do this, was all the dialogue was a bunch of people playing D&D. So, you know, Aragorn would show up on screen, but he was representing the character, or excuse me, the player playing the character Aragorn, and it was all this D&D thing. It was mildly amusing, but it did catch my attention because of that same creative tint. It was then followed through 1 year later in 2007 by something some of you may or may not have heard of called Darths and Droids, which was a direct follow-through of DM of the Rings. Darths and Droids is the same concept, but in Star Wars, and also hasn't been funny in about 3 years. Now, I do still recommend watching the old stuff, though. The prequel stuff is gold. So, those both got me thinking and got me moving in the same direction. And at the time, I had just recently picked up my job at the network center that I used to work at back at the Cube Farm. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be great. And I did several things there. In fact, I actually started working on another webcomic. It would actually have been my third webcomic at that point in time. I still have all those files. No, I'm not going to release them publicly. But it was part of a story idea, and I think I've actually talked about this one before. And Darths and Droids was a big inspiration because, well, I could sketch out every panel. Grabbing screen grabs from something else would, of course, be that creative challenge and save me some important time. None of that ever went anywhere, really, though. So I worked that job, and things went weird, and I'm going to skip over several years now. Because then we have to jump all the way forward to the much more modern times of 11 years ago. This was 11 years ago. Because 11 years ago, I started sitting down in front of my laptop and recording me thinking about, they weren't even called ruminations at the time, about a show called Star Trek Voyager. Now, you may or may not be paying attention. You know me. When I do behind the scenes, I like to follow the thread of creation and production. But when you finally get to the point where it's the actual genesis of the idea, that's when things get interesting. Because GTA 3, of course, had its roots in GTA 1 and 2, but actually had its roots much earlier than that, and you get the general gist of this. But the first time I ever really started sitting down and actually thinking about it, and actually planning out and writing something like a rewrite, it was with Star Trek Voyager. Now, the original idea was just, I just watched the episode, I just finished talking about it, what would I do to change it to make it better? Very quickly it turned into a thing. And then almost as quickly, like before we finished season 1, I got a fairly large number of comments from my relatively small viewer base at the time, all of which said, no, please stop doing this, we have no interest in this. A little discouraging. But I put it down. I just walked away from it. It's like, yep, okay. Will of the people. I was Muad'Dib, which is something to keep in mind. Yeah, for those of you not aware of the humor of this, obviously my audience was much different back then. As I am fond of repeating, a lot of people thought that I was going to kill my YouTube career by covering Star Trek. That's how different my audience was back in 11 years ago. I tell you. So, the thing is, when I start writing a story, it never leaves my head. I may lose some of the details, but something about writing carves it in iron in my memory. I have a good memory in general, but most of my memories tend to have fuzzy edges, right? I don't really remember details. Something about writing a story is completely different about that. It locks it in. So I never forgot the story I had started crafting about the Terranok and about the Conclave, which I can mention off the top of my head to you, because again, carved in iron. So it always just sort of stayed there in the back of my mind. Much more recently, at this point about 5 years ago, I was going through TNG and DS9, and I started just kind of casually chatting about, man, I wish I could just go through and add some changes, or maybe I just have some ideas about such and such, or it'd be cool ifs. Now, those videos then went live 2 years later, and people were like, yeah, that would be super cool. And by that point, I was already going through TOS and Enterprise from my perspective. And so, between the increasing amount of interest from you all, and the fact that I always wanted to do that, I started actually thinking about it. So for those of you who were paying attention during the Enterprise ruminations, you may or may not have noticed that I started talking about the Enterprise rewrite a lot more. Concepts, ideas, I started openly referring to things like the Home Sector and EarthGov and other things that would actually become part of our Trek. It does sound like our Trek when you say it out loud, like quickly, doesn't it? It isn't. As you can see, I say our differently. but it does kind of sound like our Trek when I say it very, very quickly, doesn't it? Anyways, that's funny. And so, in the middle of this, I was in the middle of doing my Enterprise and my TOS Rumination recordings, and Lord Reloaded, who hopefully is doing well right now, was doing a random stream talking about First Contact, because Lord Reloaded is not really a big fan of First Contact, and I actually understand and even agree with his reasons why. I just don't agree with the final conclusion, because I think First Contact's a great film. But he was talking about First Contact, and I just decided to bug him. So I just popped in. I'm like, hey, what's up? He's like, hey, what's up? And we started chatting live on stream about, well, okay, rather than talk about, like, just, you know, how First Contact sucks, what will we do differently? And the general, vague, casual conversation proved two things very quickly to me. So I'm going to pause here for a second in my story. Those of you who know me know that I study people. It's something I've done since I was a child. I'm very good at picking up on hints and details and otherwise inferences from people. Now, most of that's about body language and tone, but I've also gotten decent at it when it comes to text as well. I mention this... Damn it, literally. I mention this because it's important to note that two things happened very quickly while we were just casually discussing how we would rewrite First Contact. One, I mean, you're right, Rax. One, Reloaded was completely engaged with the idea, jumped on it. And two, so was everyone in chat. It was a phenomenon, and I did several other casual mentions during several other streams, several times afterwards, specifically to test people's reaction. And people's reactions were always the same. Anytime I would bring up something that they cared about, like, I'll use a direct example, Kingdom Hearts. Rewriting Kingdom Hearts. The moment that idea was put out into the wild, people in chat who were interested in the concept immediately jumped out and said, you know what I'd do? And that proved the viability of the project. Because here's the deal. I love doing creative stuff. But I can't just justify doing something like a rewrite project if the only person interested in it is me. I know that sounds strange, you know, that people do need to do things for themselves, and that's how life works, but the rewrite project's a little bigger than that. It's something that takes a fairly large amount of time and effort and concentration and creativity and resources, and that's a lot of cost if the only benefit is me, right? I'll do accordance now and again for myself, but doing that... Well, it's not, though, Evo, because it has to be a time management thing, right? You can do stuff for yourself, but if you devote this huge portion of time just to yourself, then, well, okay, maybe you can do it, but I can't, because I got other stuff going on. But you get my overall point. But this proved the viability of the project. It proved that people were interested in it. Now, obviously, the first real thought was Trek. You may notice Star Trek Rewrite is not going live today. What I did instead was I did several proof of concepts. Some of you may have seen these animations. There was a lot of thought and work and effort that went into that, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But those presentations, those little proof of concepts, were very positively received. Not just by my audience, but by Reloaded's audience, and by people that I would just show videos to who had no idea about anything. Also, speaking of people I would just show this to, like, let me use a direct example. At one point in time, I was sitting down showing one of the videos to my stepdad. And he was watching it, and he was like, oh, that's cool, but you know what you should do? And I just started laughing. He's like, what? And I explained to him what I've already explained to you. The mere fact that he wanted to jump on that and give his own thoughts for the rewrite sort of proved the viability of the project. The fact that enough people would be sufficiently engaged to not only have an opinion, but to want to share it. So, project was proved. We're going forward with Trek, right? That was several years ago. I believe it was about 2.5 years ago now, something like that. And you're probably thinking, what took so damn long? Two very big things. So the first and most apparent problem was, of course, time. This is actually totally unrelated to the Trek rewrite or rewrite project or anything. But you may or may not know that I spent, oh God, I wrote it down. I spent something like 2 years and 10 months absolutely destroying myself working the 10 hours a day, 6 days a week stream schedule because the queue was too big. Now, the queue is actually still too big, but the queue was huge. It was like 60 games strong. And you remember this, right? I had to get that queue smaller, and the only way to get the queue smaller was just to stream more. So I did it. So I didn't really get any rewrite work done. Or much of anything, really. My life was just streaming for almost 3 years. Just crushing that queue down until it was something that was a little bit more manageable. Yeah, then I adjusted and the queue reflooded. It's okay, it's still within manageable territory, although we are still at the point where we need to stream through more of the queue. But anyways, the point being, we smashed through a huge chunk of the queue, but the point is, I couldn't get a lot of rewrite work done in that period. So what I kept doing is I kept making sure that it was in the minds of the people, Reloaded and viewers and his viewers, and just people in general, because I kept talking about it. Because, as I'll talk more in the creative process, there's a phase where you haven't actually written down an outline yet, you haven't written down a script yet, but you're still working on the story. And so I kept bringing up ideas and concepts and what ifs and how would we do Whatchafigs and so forth and so on, and just kind of gauging people's opinion. Obviously, it originally was just about Trek. Over time, it kind of branched out to be about Star Wars, was the second big one that we started talking about. And, well, there are others as well. Final Fantasy being a big one. So that was the first big problem. The second big problem, which is funny, is time. Because if you're paying attention, both of these problems are time. Here's the issue. It's not really time, but the core issue is time. I stream for a living. That's my full-time job. So anything rewrite has to be, you know, in my own spare time, or I have to take time off from working in order to work on the rewrite, like I did with the Short Dark recently. So that means I need to try and make the actual rewrite product, the final finished video, with as little time as possible. And that led to the big one. The big problem that technically, I shouldn't even say technically, that technically we are still currently facing in some cases. How to visually produce these videos. Now, if you've seen the prototype videos for Trek, we're pretty codified on how we're going to do that. We're going to be pulling from a lot of different sprites from a lot of different video games in a specific style in order to present them on an episodic format. That's still rather time-consuming, but it is a proven format and it does work. It almost has to be in the manner that I just described, too, because if we do stills with the sprites, then viewers demonstrably get less visually engaged and legitimately start to lose what's happening visually on the screen. So, how to visually present this is actually currently a problem we're facing, for example, with Star Wars. So that became a huge topic, and Reloader and I would have meetings every Saturday, literally debating how do we visually present this crap. And we just kept running into the wall because there was no good solution. Actually getting a... So, you know what most YouTubers do when faced with this problem? They get a team of people. And I do mean a team. They don't have one animator who does all the animation. They have an illustrator and a compositor and an animator. And usually they have a separate sound design person too, and then they have an editor which puts it all together. That's 5 people. I had me. And so we just kept running into the wall on this problem. We could not solve it. We couldn't afford in order to actually hire a team because we looked into it. We actually started reaching out, and even at what I'm going to refer to as student rates, we still absolutely could not afford to get people involved in this. It wasn't happening. And we didn't have the time. I'm actually decent with animation, as I proved, animation and compositing. And I do have a mind for the visuals, so I can do that work if I have the time for it. And as the prototype videos showed, those videos take a while to put together, even though they're only like 3 or 4 minutes long. So, what do we do? And again, we just kept running into the wall on this. The backup option was always the same thing. It's actually technically still the backup option to this very moment. Pure audio. Or audio with very, very little visuals. Like, imagine a generic shot of, I don't know, some random mountain range in the distance and a lake over here. And you just hear the audio drama of A New Hope, for example, to use a direct comparison. That's still the backup option. It is the thing that would take the least amount of time to do. It would also probably be the worst possible option involved. Especially since, ironically, doing pure audio would probably involve more time, because we'd have to do things like sound effects, and that actually takes a lot longer than it actually sounds like. So, that's the last resort. We do want to present these visually. Now, there's this wonderful and amazing woman whose name is, I don't know what her name is, but her nickname is Ivo Iliani, sometimes referred to as Evoluny. Ivo volunteered to do some work for the Diablo rewrites specifically because, hang on, wait, you jumped ahead. You were talking about Star Trek and Star Wars. What does Diablo have to do with anything? So if you watched the announcement video this morning, even though that was obviously a dramatization and done mostly for joking purposes, that thought process is exactly what happened here. When we finally reached a point to stop being in pre-production hell and start working on production of rewrites, what project we tackled first was a huge question mark. It was actually Lord Reloaded who suggested Diablo, so credit to him for this. But I jumped on the idea because it was a very good idea. It's something I know very well, sufficiently to have done a lore run of it, capital L lore run. I'm currently doing a lowercase lore run of it, just from memory. And it's short. It's something to cut my teeth on, to figure out how this works and how this goes forwards. So, okay, we'll go ahead and do Diablo. Evo says, I'm willing to go ahead and do the thing. Hold on to that question, Huthor. Do me a favor, don't let me forget, okay? So, Evo volunteered to do the art, and I'm like, well, okay, but the art's going to have to be this absolutely ridiculous amount of stuff. And she was like, well, that's impossible. And I was like, I know. So, the nature and format, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, because the nature and format of how the project moved forward and how literally the script worked changed based on the limitations of the artwork available. Now, Evo has drawn way too many arts? We'll say artworks. Way too many artworks for this particular project. Way too many. I feel bad for her hand, and we're never doing that again. Now, that's the biggest thing I want to say. The Diablo rewrite is visually gorgeous. Never expect it again. First of all, I absolutely do not have the money to afford to hire her full-time for this kind of thing. And second of all, again, that's way too much work for one woman to do. I feel legitimately bad about how much work she did for the rewrite. So it's never happening again. As I've mentioned before, my biggest worry is that people are going to see how amazing this looks and expect all future rewrites to look like this. They won't. I've already been putting together RFF1. It looks nothing like this. However, it's a very high bar. Look at the thumbnail. I've actually got the actual video where we'll go live up in the right there. And that thumbnail, that's just Tristram. It looks incredible. Yes, Evo has killed the rewrites. We finally started, and they're dead. But point being that she volunteered to do the art, and, well, something weird happened. Most of you who are in chat right now actually probably know this part of the story, but for those of you who are not actually part of the ReWrite project, here's the deal. I have a Discord. Actually, I have 4 Discords, but one of those Discords is specifically for the theater. Now, we finished the LTTP theater last year, and it was awesome. But what some of you may or may not know was that the LTTP theater was also a demo, a tech demo for me, along with the World of Lorecraft series. Both the World of Lorecraft series, which I highly recommend you watch, and the LTTP theater, which I highly recommend you watch, were both a test bed because here's the deal. I'm a very good writer. That's not bragging. But before I sat down and did the World of Lorecraft series and the LTTP theater, I wasn't sure if that was a true statement because it had been a very long time since I've written. Now, I have spent the better part of the last 11 years of my life analyzing fiction down to the tiniest detail, but that doesn't make me a good artist. I can be a wonderful critique of a chef, but not know how to cook myself, right? So I was very worried and very concerned that I'm actually not a good enough writer to do the rewrite. So I had to write dialogue. And if you're paying attention, the World of Warcraft and LTTP theater are the two different major types of dialogue: narrative and actual in-person, in-character scripted dialogue. So I could write the narration, and I could write people talking to each other. And so that's what I did. So both of those proved, okay, I now have the capacity to write. And I please go watch those two video series. They're really good. But I could write. I could do it. Okay. Confidence regained. I have the capacity to accomplish. So now we took the Long Dark, finished the Stardew Valley block. It was a big stream. Co-Carnage rated me. It was awesome. And it's like, okay. As soon as I finished all the basic paperworky stuff I had to do, and there were several, the next thing I wanted to do was start on the next theater project. And I already knew exactly what the next theater project was. And that next theater project was Final Fantasy IV. In fact, I was already at the point in pre-production where I had already done most of the tech stuff. I was ready to hit record. You know what I mean? Everything else was set up. I'd gotten the files properly set up. I'd gotten the audio properly set up. I had already figured out how I was going to capture it, in what manner, in order to maintain quality, and also completely remove the voice acting, while at the same time completely replacing the soundtrack with the Pixel Remaster. That was just a mod, but still. All that stuff was done. I was ready to hit go. But then I had a weird random thought. Thank you, Rex. I had a weird random thought, and that thought was, hold up. I wonder if they'd be interested in doing rewrite stuff instead of theater stuff. Now, don't mistake me. I've enjoyed doing the theaters quite a bit, going all the way back to Paper Mario 2, which is pretty old at this point. But it kind of fills almost the same slot, really, in terms of, obviously, creative outlet, but in terms of production. And it's also way easier from an editing perspective to put lines into a video that doesn't have to have, you know, a text block, which, so for those of you not aware, like when I'm recording for a theater, I have to be voicing a lot of the dialogue out loud to try and get the timing for when the text blocks show up and don't show up, which doesn't always work because sometimes, you know, I'm off from the timing of what the actor does, and sometimes the game doesn't allow me to do that because it renders text differently, and it's a whole extra layer of time and hassle, and it always has been. But with a theater, the text block, metaphorically speaking, can go away when they're done talking. So that particular issue was gone. So instead, it was like, oh god, yeah, no, the timing for FF9 was absolute hell. Some of you probably didn't even notice that I actually did a lot of editing tricks in the FF9 theater to chop down and chop out dialogue and screen time to try and make it look at least close to what it should be. It was a huge hassle. But if we just remove that and do it, so I'm like, okay, so I reached out to the actors and I'm like, hey, you know, no judgment, no nothing. How would you like to work on a rewrite instead of a theater? So, you know, the perspective is different, and there's obviously some variances, but it's the same general concept. And I was really scared when I asked this because if you're not familiar with this, because if you're paying attention to the timeline here, at this point, the rewrites were going to be me doing the voice acting. Just me. In the similar manner to the World of Warcraft series. One narrator explaining events while they're being visually presented, which I could do, of course. I already proved that with the World of Warcraft. But reaching out to the actors, I was like, and yeah, it was near unanimous approval. There were a couple of people who were slightly hesitant, but were still interested. And so I was just like, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because now because I have a wonderful cast of people. Y'all are amazing. Now we can actually, that opens up a door for the rewrites in general. There's so much other stuff we can do, including things like dialogue. So, okay, we've got the project, Diablo. We've got a cast, and I've just taken the Long Dark. And Evo has just volunteered to do visuals. And I'm not going to bore you with all the nitty-gritty, because I've already been talking for 30 minutes. But there was all of this kind of shaped and formed the overall format, because each of the rewrites is functionally going to look very similar from each other, even if I use sprites instead of Evo's amazing drawings, or even if I use stills from a movie or whatever. There's a lot of different visual ideas we can and will use. For example, the Warcraft rewrite will be using static shots, but obviously it won't be a still, it won't be a picture, because it'll be like this, the thing you're seeing behind me here, right? So it'll be just a shot of this mountain, and it'll be a shot that's relevant to whatever I'm saying or whatever they're saying at the time. Make sense? So we figured out most of the visual presentation. Not all, but most of the visual presentation. We figured out what project we have actors, and I know I'm a good writer, so I sat down, I'm like, okay, I've got to write the script. And I gotta tell you this. Actually writing the script for the Diablo rewrite was extremely stressful. And I'm not sure why, because I smashed it out in 2 days. That's not bragging, because the point is it didn't feel like 2 days. It felt like a week. It felt like I was just like, oh, God, I can't. And I kept staring at the next line like, I have no idea what to say next. Oh, God. And I have this trick where I get up and I'll wander around. And I'll just wander around and talk it out verbally. I'll just speak out loud and try to figure out what to do next. And what inevitably happens is I'm like, okay, then I'll do this, and this, and then it goes here and there. And then I got to say this. Okay, and then I'll come back down and I'll sit back down and I'll, go back to writing. But slammed out that script. Again, not bragging. Really didn't realize it was that short a period of time. And it's like, okay, we'll do it. We'll get auditions in. We'll get the lines in. We'll get it going. And the other thing is that it took, not counting pre-production work, which I'm not counting because it's kind of a distended timeline, it took about 2.5 months to get the Diablo rewrite concluded. Now that may sound like a long time, and if it does, you know nothing about production, no offense. That is an extraordinarily fast production cycle, which is exactly what I've wanted this whole time. Because I do still have a full-time job, and I know I cannot afford to hire my actors. I would love to. I would love to be able to pay my actors. I don't make that much money. I'm sorry. So this is all spare time territory. I'm not making money off of it. Nobody else is making money off of it. We're just doing this for fun. And for a 2.5 month production cycle for something we're doing in our spare time, that's crazy. By the way, we are currently in casting for RFF1 because the script's already done. To give you an idea of how much this is rolling forwards, and which is I know that sounds strange, but putting on the manager hat and the producer hat for a second, being already on the next vine as we're letting go of the Diablo rewrite vine is a huge relief to me. I can't even tell you in words. In fact, I've already got most of the outline for RFF2 done. And we've already got a fairly large amount of pre-production work done on our wars. In fact, what I'm thinking right now is we'll probably go ahead and do Diablo, FF1, FF2, possibly FF3. Not sure about this one yet. And then the first episode of our wars, which will be the Mandalorian Crusade. And we'll see where that goes. Yeah, I know, right, Rex? It's great. Sure, Cord. Also, I think someone else asked for an audition. If you happen to be in my Discord, it'll be really easy to invite you. If you do not, well, we can figure something out. That's kind of what I was thinking too, Rex. Especially since the Nest trilogy, more than anything else, is already something I mostly have formed in my mind. I haven't really put a lot of thought into 5 through 12. And it's okay, Jordan. You're definitely in my Discord, right? Right? Oh yeah, that's another thing. So okay, real quick, because we're running out of time here. No, we're doing 10-2, also known as the proper 11, Wadid. Are any of the FFs going to be connected? That's an interesting question. We'll come back to that. Where's Core? There you are. No. Hang on. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Because I can just invite Cord here. Boom, there. Cord's invited. Done. Anybody else? You don't get an invite. No invites for anybody. Hang on. Sorry. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. This is just such a pain to do, especially live. This is why I usually ask my mods to invite people. If you want to try and participate in the voice acting crew, this is a good time to poke me because I've got the link here. I've got an invite link. Hang on a sec. This is taking too long. How long the video is? Sure. Sure. Diablo ReWrite, which is Diablo 1, 2, and 3, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm running out of time here. Is 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 54 seconds. Yeah, you know what, Bragwin, if you could invite, that would be awesome. If you don't have invite rights, I'll figure that out. Site's apparently having issues here. Can Bragwin do invites? How do I set it? I don't even know how to do this. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. You're already too late for RFF1 anyways. So I'm doing auditions today for that. Excuse me. Let's talk about rewriting. So, all of that is the behind the scenes of where we got to today and where we're currently at. I do want to talk about a couple of things very, very quickly, because there's some philosophy that goes into rewriting that some people don't seem to understand, and this is a perfect time, I think, to go ahead and discuss that. So first and foremost, what is a rewrite? A rewrite, in the most simplest terms, is a reimagining. It's something that's actually surprisingly rare, all things considered, in fiction, because most people, when they do this kind of things, they either do a remake, or they do a reboot, or they do just a straight-up sequel, or whatever. A true reimagining, though, is something whose goal it is, and again, this boils it back down to the FF6 and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars thing, is to look at something and take the overall puzzle pieces, all of the different puzzle pieces of what made the original work, and try to do your own take on it, right? Because, yeah, as Rax points out, the most common thing most people seem to think is that this is a fix flick, because these are fundamentally fanfics, although I don't like to use that phrase because they have a lot of negative baggage attached. But no, the idea is not to fix the rewrite. Let me tell you a quick story here. Way back in the day, as part of the testing to see if people are interested in this, Lore Reloaded, Jesse Gender, and myself did several streams rewriting Star Trek's 1 through 6, the original movies. And when we got to Star Trek 2 and 6, the overwhelming number of people in the chat and the comments were all like, well, there's nothing to fix. As if that was the goal. As if that was the method and the proper design was to fix what was wrong with the work. Because everybody's like, oh, there's tons of stuff to fix about 1 and 5 and 3, but there's nothing to touch with 2, but that's not the mentality. The mentality is to do my take on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The mentality is to do my take on Diablo, and so forth and so on. You get the idea. And so that's a completely different philosophy, and will lead in a completely different direction, which perfectly leads into the next thing I want to comment on. Now, I don't want to sound negative, but one of the most frustrating things with regards to the rewrite has been how many people over the last probably about a year at this point, but especially in the last few months as we've actually entered production phases for rewrites, is people popping in and saying, well, what are you going to do about this thing? And it's like, because what most people, there's two layers of this that most people don't seem to understand. First of all, I have no idea what O'Brien is going to do when it comes to the time travel episode in Deep Space Nine. I don't know if O'Brien's going to be on Deep Space Nine at that point in time. I don't know what Deep Space Nine, the station, is going to be at that point in time. I don't know if like there's going to be time travel in that particular episode. And you're probably thinking, well, why not? Because that's over here. The way a rewrite tends to work, and my rewrites tend to work, is I start over here at the beginning, and I write forwards. All the way back here It may resemble the original in several ways, but as storytelling progresses, the world, the very setting, will naturally change and move and morph around that. The example I love to use is our Enterprise. Because our Enterprise, even as of the first season, sees the foundation of the coalition of planets, which is consistent of the Betazoids, humans, Vulcans, Tellarites, Andorians, and arguably Ferengi, all of which are coming together into one of the first interstellar alliances in history. And if you know anything about the show Star Trek Enterprise, you know that already doesn't resemble canon at all. But all of that, none of that's deliberate, if that makes any sense. I was going to talk about how I write a little bit. Yeah, it's a little exactly linear. It's a bit of the butterfly effect, because I start over here and the stories just flow. That's how I write. I have outlines, I have concepts. I want to talk about that real quick, if you don't mind. I've only got like 10 minutes left here. I start as zoomed out as possible. All the way out until you're looking at the most fundamental concepts for the setting, right? So, like, I'll use Star Trek. What's the most fundamental concept of Star Trek? The idealism and optimism. Right there, that's where we started. So everything in our Trek had to revolve around that overall concept. Things have to be optimistic. They have to be leaning towards something good. It has to be about a better future, right? Okay, so now we zoom in a little bit. All right, so we're looking at the overall setting. What are the big setting-wide things that need to be resolved? The Borg, time travel, how FTL works, very fundamentally basic things in order to start laying down some bricks in order to start building a foundation, right? So, okay, we figured out the Borg, we figured out how time travel works. But let me tell you, solving time travel for our Trek was a huge hassle. I did it because I'm good at writing time travel, but God, that was a hassle. So Borg, time travel, FTL, transporters, replicators, all that stuff. Then we zoom in some more, right? And you get the idea. I just keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in. So while I have a vague overall outline, I don't actually decide several specific things until I have zoomed all the way into the character level, to the scripting phase, which is the third to last phase in the overall project. And that's the point. I can't tell you what's going to go on with O'Brien over here, because if you zoom out at the level I'm currently, I have absolutely no idea what's going on. Oh, I'll tell you right now, time travel in our Trek is Type 1. All time travel in our Trek has always happened and will always happen. I'd love to talk about it and the bubble and how incredibly genius it is, but I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. I'm just really happy with how it turned out. But it took a lot of work because it's Type 1 time travel, which means all the time travel in our Trek is already mapped out as of now. It has to be. That's how Type 1 time travel works. Literally has to be. In fact, Voyager shows up in the first season of our Enterprise. I'm just going to say that. The show, the ship, the ship Voyager shows up in the first season of our Enterprise. Anyways, little teaser. But Diablo is another perfect example of this. Okay, zoom out. Actually, kind of no, Loner, but I don't want to spoil too much. So, all right. What do we do with Diablo? What's the core fundamental aspect of Diablo? Demons versus angels. That is at the core fundamental aspect of everything that the entire series, entire franchise is centered around. It's all about the burning hells and the high heavens. Okay. So, started thinking about this, came up with this whole idea for the pillars and the fabric. You're going to see a wonderful map by Evo in the first few seconds of the video. It shows up right, it's one of the first things you see. And the idea here is that the pillars, very, very briefly, the pillars generate sentience. They generate thought and consciousness, right? But the fabric generates everything else, life and matter and physics, okay? The two combined form what we refer to as life. But the distinction is important because, and that's the way I write. That's why I'm telling you this, is because I like to know the rules of the setting and how things work before I start writing. Because then, if something happens in the story, I know immediately what's going to be a result of that. I know how the setting's going to react to that because I know how the setting works. Make sense? That's how I prefer to write. That's why the first thing we had to decide for our wars was, how does the Force operate? It was the very first step, and we spent the better part of like 3 weeks deciding how the Force works. We actually have defined the Force at this point in time, and it's already been useful. We've already run into situations where it's useful, like with our Grievous, as Rax pointed out in chat. I hope you guys are going to like Grievous, because I'm actually really happy with the ideas we've circled around for Grievous. But that leads me to the last thing I was going to talk about, because I'm really running out of time here. Because the final step here, and I just wanted to gush about this for a minute, is I always, ever since I was a kid, I have always written better when I have someone else to write off of. The final script is me. The final decision is me. The outline is me. I'm the one who is the mainliner for the story. But if I just sit in an encased room with no phone and no internet, and I have to write a story, it's going to be worse than if I have someone to bounce off of. Now, for a huge portion of my life, that's been my wonderful and amazing sister. She has been an incredible creative consultant for me for a very long period of time. I have gone to her constantly, and we have hashed together some amazing and fantastic stories over the years. In fact, every story idea I just told you about our Wars, our Trek, and our Diablo has had her fingerprints on it. But, as much as I love her to death, and I absolutely do, there's a concept I've always wanted. I've even been calling it this since before the ReWrite project even got started properly, and that's the writer's room. To me, the ideal would be to have a writer's room of several people, and we all just kind of, it's sort of a directed meeting, right? Let me just put us into fundamental territory. How many of you have seen Star Trek The Next Generation? Real quick, how many of you have seen Star Trek The Next Generation? Some of you have to have. 1, 3, no. Nobody's seen that? I mention this because something that was done very deliberately in TNG and became part of the hallmark of TNG was the conference room. Picard was the captain. The final call is his. The final decision is his. But he always liked pulling his senior staff into that room and saying, all right, what do you got? And getting their buy-in, getting their options, getting their concepts. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that for years. And I finally have it, which is what I'm leading up to. The Discord, the ReWrite Discord is decently designed and formatted such that people can only, excuse me, only have to participate in the things they're interested in. But we've had a lot of people who have been tossing out ideas and fleshing out ideas and telling me how much I suck in the writer's room several times. And April Fools, everything I'm saying is actually real. That's the joke. I'm serious. That is the April Fool's joke. I suppose I should talk about that too, but so writer's room. I wanted the writer's room, and I have it, and like the Grievous idea, I'd love to take credit for that, but that would be disingenuous because that was our idea. And you get the concept. So I may be the one who finally sits down and writes the script for the Mandalorian Crusade, but that's got like a dozen different hands in that script, you know? Anyways, so I also want to talk about why April 1st. So you may or may not have been paying attention to the timeline I told you earlier, and I mentioned how this is a project that's been kind of percolating in my brain for the better part of 2.5 years ago. This was always supposed to go live during April 1st. Because that's my personal favorite April Fool's joke. The thing that, hey, here's some ridiculous thing. By the way, it's real. And that was always intended to be the launch of the ReWrite project. But because of all the problems we've talked about, it never happened. So we're finally here. We're finally there. April Fools. ReWrite project is actually finally going live. Yay! Now, I'm really running low on timer. I gotta cut it so I'm about 2 minutes. Because it's gonna start going live pretty soon, and I don't want to hear "bwah" in my ears. So, Huthor said, I asked you not to let me forget. It's funny because I still remember this here. An idea has occurred to me that if enough people are interested in it and like the Diablo rewrite, to add it as a funding goal. I'm not sure how well that would be received, but it is the kind of thing that would make it a lot easier to swallow the amount of time it consumes. The real problem there is I'm very hesitant to do that because of the fact that I can't share that money with my actors. And you're probably thinking, why not? Because it's not extra money. it's still the same income source from the same people who are donating the same amount of money on a regular basis to me. My income will not go up commensurately to then be able to give this extra portion to the actors. It's just showing interest, which is kind of how the system is designed to work in general. So that's the biggest reason I've been hesitant to allow that, because I feel like there might be some expectations there. That being said, it is a way to show interest, and we do have the triple system right now as a way to kind of think about that. So I haven't decided 100% if I'm going to allow it or not, but it is definitely something I've been thinking about. Because again, it kind of depends on how many people are actually tangibly interested in future rewrites. And who knows, maybe I'll actually, you know, win the lottery someday, and then, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dump a bucket of money on Evo for her artwork for our Diablo. I hope y'all are looking forward to this, by the way. I'm very excited, if it's not obvious. This has been a long time in coming. Obviously, it's not Trek, but that's okay. We'll get to Trek someday, and we will. I'm actually really looking forward to it at this point. You've got probably about 1 minute to ask me questions, literally about 50 seconds, if anybody has any right at the end here. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and chop it off, and I've actually already got the chat open. I will be, of course, joining you in chat during the rewrite, as I usually do for premieres. Yes, here's a link. Sorry, if you type !rewrite into chat right now, you get a temporary link straight to it. Where's your invite to our Wars? You said you didn't want to participate, Uthor. In fact, I bothered to recite the whole outline for our Wars, and your response was, I'm not interested in that. Can I do a post stream? Maybe? Maybe? I suppose it depends if there's interest. We could do a post stream. I was sort of anticipating that Monday's stream would be a bit of a post stream, but we could do that. I don't know. We'll think about it. We'll think about it. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and chop off recording, chop off stream, and I will see you in the Diablo rewrite.